If you've been falsely accused of domestic violence, you're already living with the fallout, confusion, fear, and a sense that your entire future is hanging by a thread. Maybe the alleged victim is on your side now, or maybe they're not. But either way, here is the hard truth. Understanding why someone might lie about abuse is not enough. You need to know how to prove it in court. By the end of this video, you'll learn the top 3 reasons that someone might falsely accuse you of domestic violence and, more importantly, how to back up those arguments with evidence. I'll show you things like text messages, testimony, and even behavior patterns that can become powerful tools in your defense. And reason number 3, it is the least obvious, but it's one of the most common, and it can completely change the way that your case is handled. So stay with me, you won't want to miss it. My name is Veronica. I'm a domestic violence defense attorney, and I help people throughout the entire state of California put their cases behind them so that they can enjoy their lives and their freedom. I'm also the creator of a course called Defeat the DVRO, in which I teach you from start to finish how to represent yourself at a restraining order hearing and win. So if in addition to dealing with a criminal charge, you are also dealing with a restraining order, make sure that you get your free first class in the course via the link down below. Okay, in criminal law, there's a term that we use called theory of the case, and it's not just a fancy legal term, it's the backbone of your defense. A theory of the case is your side's version of what really happened, supported by evidence and presented in a way that makes sense to the judge or the jury. And while the law says that you are innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal cases, let me tell you, just arguing reasonable doubt and that the state hasn't proven its case rarely works on its own. To win, you need a clear, compelling theory that answers the most important question, the question that is running through everyone's heads if you were accused by the victim, which is, why would the alleged victim lie? Now, sometimes the answer is obvious, like in divorce or child custody cases where there is a clear incentive to file a false accusation. But what about when the motive isn't so clear, when the situation seems more subtle or more complex? That's when a strong defense with a strong theory of the case that makes sense comes into play. Theory of the case number 1, the victim lied because they were afraid of getting arrested. Okay, so let's start with one of the most common reasons that someone might lie about domestic violence. They're afraid of getting arrested. In the heat of the moment, people don't always think logically. They might be scared that if they admit what really happened, they'll end up in handcuffs. So instead, they point the finger at someone else, at the other person, unfortunately at you, thinking that it's their only way out. And this kind of fear is especially common when someone feels like they have something big to lose, like their job or professional license or their reputation. They often don't realize that this lie can quickly spiral out of control because the victim cannot just go and dismiss the charges later or say, oh, I actually don't want to press charges. They may not know that, and this can lead to life-altering consequences for the person that they accuse. You. So let's get into an example of how this plays out and what type of evidence you would use to support this theory of the case. Take Fran and Dan. They get into a heated argument and Fran throws a plate in frustration, hitting Dan in the face. Fran calls the police, and when the police arrive, Fran panics. She's terrified of getting arrested. You see, Fran, she's a nurse, and she's afraid that if she gets arrested and if she gets convicted of domestic violence, she will lose her nursing license. So Fran tells the officers that she threw the plate, yes, but it was in self-defense because Dan was attacking her. After Dan gets arrested, Fran regrets it, but the damage is done, and Dan is the one who's dealing with the fallout, not her. Now, to defend someone in Dan's position, we would look for the evidence that tells the real story. The first thing that we would look at is lack of physical marks on Fran. If Fran claims that she was defending herself, then where are the injuries to her? Now, there wouldn't necessarily need to be injuries, but if it got to the point that she's throwing a plate at Dan's face, at his head, then you'd think that there would be some injuries on her. So the absence of any visible marks on her can cast doubt on her story. Now, what about text messages from Fran to Dan? So if after the incident, as often happens, Fran sends text messages apologizing or admitting what really happened. These messages can be powerful evidence in court. Now, it's not 100%, and you're going to hear as we go through this evidence that None of it is 100%. The thing about domestic violence is that usually there's not going to be video showing what happened because it's in the privacy of your own home. Usually it's not going to be absolutely 100%, but we are looking for evidence that will support our theory of the case here. All right, another piece of evidence that we could use is Fran not asking for an emergency protective order. So the police, when they come out and they make an arrest for domestic violence, they will almost always ask the victim if the victim wants an emergency protective order, and the victim can say yes or no. Now, if Fran truly felt that she was in danger, she would have asked for an emergency protective order. So if she didn't, then that is going to be a red flag, and that is something that the defense can use to support this theory that she wasn't really afraid, and she wasn't really afraid because she wasn't actually the victim, because she lied, because she was afraid of getting arrested. All right, and then Fran's testimony. So testimony is evidence. So Fran's own words in court, if it gets to the point of actually being a jury trial, if Fran is willing to not just go on the stand and say, I lied, that is not going to be sufficient. But if she's willing to admit and explain that she was so afraid of getting arrested because of her nursing license and that she panicked, and maybe explains why she threw the plate in the first place, why she was so angry, then that can help the jury understand what really happened that night. Again, it's not 100%. The victim cannot choose to just drop the charges. The prosecution in this type of case will usually argue that Fran just regrets it because she didn't actually want Dan to get in trouble, but he did abuse her, or that she is a battered woman and has battered woman syndrome, or something along those lines to discredit what she's saying now and to try to get the jury to believe what she said initially. But by putting all of this together, you're creating a picture for the court that Fran wasn't the victim here, that her actions were driven by fear of getting in trouble, by losing her professional license, and not by self-defense. Theory of the case number 2. The victim lied out of revenge or retaliation. Now, revenge and retaliation are incredibly powerful emotions and motivators, especially when it comes to relationships where trust has been broken. When someone feels betrayed, humiliated, or hurt, they may lash out in ways that they wouldn't under normal circumstances. And sometimes that includes making false accusations of domestic violence as a way to regain control or to inflict punishment on the other person. So let's get into our example of Jan and Stan. Jan catches Stan cheating. She sees his text planning to meet up with another woman, and she is furious, understandably. In the heat of the moment, while holding Stan's phone, Jan hits him in the face with it, and she winds up to do it again, but this time Stan grabs her arm to stop her. In the process, she gets a bruise on her arm. Jan's heartbreak turns into anger, and she decides to call the police. She tells them that Stan physically attacked her and shows them the bruise on her arm as proof. So Stan is arrested on the spot, and Jan feels completely justified. While cheating isn't illegal, she feels like it should be, and she feels like Stan got what he deserved. Now, in a case like this, what we would focus on is uncovering the truth by highlighting inconsistencies in Jan's story. So here's how we would approach it. First, we would look at and we would use Stan's text to another woman. Now, look, nobody likes cheating. This is something that really has to be explained to the jury in a way that is as palatable as possible, where, you're admitting that, look, Stan is no angel, but cheating is not illegal, as much as Jan would like it to be. And some of them may feel sympathy for Jan. That's okay. You can actually use that. It's important to recognize that Jan's anger and humiliation are more likely a trigger for violence than Stan suddenly becoming enraged because he was caught. If the jurors want to empathize with Jan, that's fine. This isn't a trial on morality. It's just about, did Stan do what he was accused of? If you can empathize with Jan and you can understand why Jan might hit Stan in the face with a phone, well, then you can understand our theory of the case, and it makes our theory more believable. Now, what about photos of Stan's injuries? So if Stan has a bruised face, and hopefully he took pictures of that, even if there was just redness, then that is going to make it clear that he got those injuries somehow. And that raises the question, how does this fit with Jan's story, right? Depending on the shape of the bruise, it could also be clear that this was made with an object that is shaped like a phone. And if we have those pictures, then we're also going to want to look at Jan's initial statement to the police. Jan didn't mention anything that could explain Stan's injury when she reported the incident. So even if later in court, when confronted with this picture, she admits that she hit him with the phone, but she claims it was self-defense after he grabbed her arm, that omission, leaving that out, is a major red flag that the defense should grab like a dog with a bone and not let go of. Another thing we'd want to use are the photos of Jan's arm. Usually, when one person attacks the other, you don't do it just by grabbing their arm. Now, it is possible, sure, but it makes more sense that you would grab someone's arm to stop them from using their arm, using their hand, using something in their hand to attack. And then finally, we have to look at and argue, does Jan's story even make sense with all of this evidence? If Stan got caught texting another woman, and we can prove that, we have the text with the other woman, does it seem likely that he would become so enraged and attack Jan by grabbing Jan's arm? Now, it's possible some people, when they get caught doing something, their response is anger. That's true, but again, none of this is 100%. And we make these arguments to stack the odds in the defense's favor and, yes, to raise reasonable doubts. Theory of the case number 3. The victim lied to manipulate the situation and or out of desperation. So manipulation and desperation are often the least obvious reasons for a false accusation, but these are surprisingly common in domestic violence cases. When someone feels like their entire world is falling apart, whether it's losing a home, a relationship, or even their sense of security, they might take extreme actions to regain control. Sometimes this comes with a touch of narcissism that makes normal people not really understand why someone would act this way, but people do. So sometimes this includes making accusations that are exaggerated or completely untrue. The accuser might feel like they're backed into a corner, and a false claim becomes a way to leverage and frankly, to control the situation. So let's get into an example of how this plays out. Take Benny and Jenny. Benny owns a home, and after dating for several months, Jenny moves in. Now, things seem fine at first, but eventually Benny decides, this relationship just isn't really going to work out. Jenny is just not the one. So calmly, he tells Jenny that it's over. But for Jenny, it is not just a breakup. It's a complete life crisis. She's a student with no income, with no backup plan for housing, and what flashes through her mind is the idea of moving back to Ohio to live with her parents. She's 30 and it feels humiliating to leave Southern California and have to go back to Ohio. Plus, she loves Benny and she believes that they haven't given the relationship a real shot. So she's desperate to stay and she tries to convince Benny, but he just won't budge, and he's so calm that it makes her even angrier. Later that evening, Jenny is drunk and she trips, but instead of calming down, she calls the police. She tells them that Benny pushed her. Benny's arrested and the police ask Jenny if she wants that emergency protective order. She says yes. So now Benny's world is turned upside down. He's unable to return to his home. He's sleeping on a friend's couch. He still has to pay the mortgage, by the way. And he's dealing with a criminal case. Meanwhile, Jenny now has all the leverage. She has control of Benny's home and the ability to make Benny's situation even worse by pursuing a long-term restraining order, by potentially testifying against him in the criminal case. She can't drop the charges, but she can make it worse. So once she has that leverage, Jenny texts Benny repeatedly from his home. She says she loves him, she wants him to come home, and she even admits that the police told her to file a restraining order that could last up to 5 years, but says that she doesn't want to have to do that. Now, in a case like this, and this is inspired by many cases that I have seen over the years, the defense needs to focus on showing that Jenny's accusations were driven by desperation and an attempt to manipulate the situation to her advantage. So we would approach it by first, of course, using Jenny's text messages, her messages to Benny, professing love and expressing guilt. That can paint a very different picture from what she told the police. Why ask for an emergency protective order and then go and text Benny? If she truly felt unsafe, why would she ask him to come home? I would also focus on the nature of this alleged domestic violence itself. I would look at what part of her body was injured and what that injury was likely to come from. For example, if she fell and she bruised her knee, okay, so then how is she saying that Benny pushed her? That he just came and pushed her from behind? It's possible, but that's really unlikely in the context of domestic violence, that there's one single act of physical violence and it is a push from behind. That would be very unusual. I would also want to look at the body-worn video and Jenny's demeanor. I'd want to see, does she seem drunk? Is she slurring her speech? If so, then we can use that. Jenny's lack of income and nowhere to go. So she's a student, she doesn't have a job, and this provides a strong motive for Jenny's actions. Her financial instability helps explain why she might feel desperate enough to lie. So this is something that we would want to ask her about on the stand. Perhaps we'd want to investigate financial aid at her school, and if it was mid-semester, was she able able to even get additional financial aid? How many hours of classes was she taking? What type of job could she get? Would she be able to even live on her own? Or was she faced with the prospect of being homeless or having to go back to Ohio in defeat? We'd also want to look at, did Benny have any family or friends that he communicated with about ending the relationship? Especially if he was calm and consistent. He said, you know what, I feel really bad, but I think I'm going to end it with Jenny. It just really isn't working out between us. That shows that he wasn't angry, he was calm, and that he had made this decision to break up with her. Because in situations like this, you have to anticipate that Jenny may not even admit that he was actually breaking up with her. So we have to be ready to prove that. And then finally, one argument you want to make to support this theory of the case is common sense. When most people decide to end a relationship, they may feel bad, they may dread it, they may worry about the other person's reaction, they may feel sad, but they aren't usually consumed by uncontrollable anger. They don't usually go around shoving the other person down. It's just not normally how people feel. So Benny's calm demeanor, Jenny's desperation, and the lack of credible evidence of violence all point to one thing, that this was a false accusation driven by Jenny's need to maintain control in a situation where she felt powerless. I hope you found this video helpful. False accusations can turn your life upside down, but with the right defense strategy, the right theory of the case, you can fight back. If you need help with a criminal case, feel free to give me a call. You can find my number down below. You can also book a call directly via the link there. And if you did find this helpful, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell.